My name is Hannah Delaney. I'm 36 years old, and a few weeks before my wedding, my cousin asked if she could use my venue. On the same day, just earlier, she promised she'd be out before the real stuff started, like it was a community center I'd rented for a bake sale and not the place I'd spent a year of my life planning around. I laughed when I got the text, genuinely, sent back a LOL and everything, because it had to be a joke. Spoiler, it wasn't. Amanda, my cousin, my Aunt Linda's darling daughter, followed up with a smiling emoji and, seriously, though it'd be so aesthetic if we both used it. Double blessings or something, right? I stared at my phone for a full minute. My fiancé Dan thought I was having a stroke. I showed him the message, and he blinked like he couldn't comprehend it either. Let me rewind. Because this isn't just about a venue. This is about a lifetime of being asked to give until there's nothing left, and then being shamed for asking to keep even that. Growing up, Rachel, my older sister, was the family star. She sang at church. She got the big graduation party with the DJ and the chocolate fountain. She had a parade of boyfriends, and when she got pregnant at 19, the entire family practically hosted a coronation. I was the quiet one, the helper, the planner, the one who understood. My mom once told me, "We don't worry about you, Hannah. You'll always land on your feet." Translation, you don't get attention, or help, or applause, just expectations. By the time I turned 30, I was the one everyone leaned on. When Rachel's marriage imploded shocking, no one I let her and her 2 kids move in with me for 8 months. When Amanda needed help with her college applications, I edited every essay. I never got a thank you, but Aunt Linda did send me a mug that said, "Boss Babe." So there's that. When I got engaged last year, it was the one thing finally that was mine. I paid for my own ring when Dan's job got shaky. I coordinated everything. We booked this beautiful venue on the lake. Not too fancy, not basic either. It had soft lighting and a wraparound porch, and this antique fountain that looked like it belonged in a Jane Austen movie. I was in love with it. Invites went out, people RSVP'd, and then the text came. I told Amanda no, gently at first. "Hey, I really want the day to be about one wedding ours." Her response, "Wow, didn't realize you were so territorial. It's literally just a few hours." When I didn't budge, Aunt Linda called. She started with, "I'm just calling as a concerned family member," which anyone with relatives like mine knows is code for prepare to be guilt-tripped into oblivion. She said Amanda had been planning a quick elopement-style ceremony and thought it would be symbolic and sweet to do it at my venue. She said I was being unreasonable and that it was such a small ask. When I still said no, the real bombs dropped. "She's heartbroken. You've always been the rigid one. I just don't know why you're making this a big deal. And my favorite courtesy of my own mother, your wedding is dividing the family." That night, I sat in my car in the driveway, dress catalog still open on my passenger seat, and cried so hard my chest locked up. I couldn't go inside. Couldn't face Rachel, who had accidentally let it slip in the group chat that she thought Amanda's idea was adorable. My wedding was already being treated like a potluck. I was the main course, and somehow still not enough. Dan tried to comfort me, said we could find another venue elope, whatever made it easier, but something in me snapped. A small, sharp splinter that had been wedged in for decades finally twisted just enough to hurt. This wasn't about the venue. It never was. It was about the fact that I wasn't allowed to want things. Not loudly, not firmly, not without consequence. So I wiped my face, closed the dress catalog, and made a decision. No more compromises. Not with them. After that night in the car, I changed. Not in the dramatic movie montage way where I cut my hair and started punching walls. No. My change was quiet, surgical. I stopped replying in the family group chat. I muted Aunt Linda and Rachel's daily story updates. When my mom called to ask if I'd reconsidered just letting Amanda use the garden for a few minutes, I said no, and I won't be talking about this again, and hung up. The silence after that was almost therapeutic. It was like the moment right after a thunderstorm. Everything wet and heavy, but finally still. I stopped offering to help. With anything. Rachel texted me a week later asking if I could babysit her kids so she could catch up on self-care. I said I had plans. She didn't respond. Just posted a passive-aggressive meme later that said, "Funny how the people you help the most vanish when you need them." My mom left a voicemail a few days later. "Hi, sweetie, just checking in. I know this wedding stuff is stressful, and I hate seeing everyone so upset. Maybe if you reached out to Amanda and cleared the air. I just think the family needs unity right now. Love you. Love you, the way you say it after delivering a slap wrapped in wrapping paper. The thing is, I wasn't stressed about the wedding. I was stressed about them, so I started planning in secret. Finalizing details with Dan and our planner, quietly adding a new password to the wedding website, updating the RSVP link, so only select people had access to real info. By the second week, I found out Rachel had sent her own unofficial schedule to a few cousins, claiming we were starting later than expected, so people could attend Amanda's morning thing too. That's when I really started to worry. Amanda was still planning to show up, at my venue, on my day, and my own family was helping her. Dan was furious. He offered to call the venue and make sure they knew no one was allowed in early, but I stopped him. I needed to know who would take my silence as weakness. Turns out a lot of them. Aunt Linda cornered me at my grandma's birthday brunch, which I hadn't even wanted to attend. She waited until Dan had stepped away, then leaned over with this buttery smile. Look, honey, I know you're upset, but Amanda's wedding is going to be very small. Just a couple of friends, barely any setup. You won't even notice. Think of it as adding to the love in the air. I stared at her, then took a sip of my mimosa and said, You're not welcome at my wedding. She blinked. Excuse me. You, Amanda, Rachel, and Mom. You're all off the guest list. She laughed like I was joking, but I didn't blink, didn't flinch. Are you serious? I didn't answer, just stood up and walked out of the restaurant. Dan followed me to the car. I didn't say anything until we were halfway down the highway. Then I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for 30 years. I think I just declared war, I whispered. He didn't say anything, just reached over and took my hand. The fallout came fast. My mom called that night hysterical. How dare I embarrass the family like this? Aunt Linda was devastated Amanda had been crying all day. Rachel had just wanted to support everyone. That call ended with Mom saying, If you go through with this, don't expect me to show up. For the first time in my life, that sentence didn't hurt. I didn't want them there. Every time I pictured them sitting in the front row, I felt nauseous. Not because I wanted them to love me, but because I knew they didn't. Not really. They loved what I did for them, how small I made myself, how useful I was when I wasn't asking for anything in return. Without that, I was disposable. The rumors started after that. One of my cousins messaged me to say Rachel had told people I was on edge, that I was having a breakdown, and that Dan was controlling everything. Another said Amanda was telling guests that I was jealous of her and threatened by other strong women in the family. Strong. That was rich coming from someone who needed a literal handout for her elopement ceremony. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. I just quietly uninvited every single person who liked, shared, or engaged with their posts. It was petty, I admit it, but it was also necessary. I spent years trying to be reasonable, trying to explain my pain in terms they could understand, trying to be the bigger person. All that got me was used. So now, I was done being useful. I focused on the wedding, not the drama, not the whispers, just Dan, the flowers, the food. We moved the ceremony time up by 2 hours, told only those we trusted. I hired security. Not a big team, just 2 guys in suits. But it was enough. The final straw came 1 week before the wedding. Rachel texted me. A single sentence. Wow, so you're really cutting us out. I replied, you were never in. And I meant it. I should have known it went deeper. The signs were always there, whispers after I left the room, wedding details mysteriously leaking despite my silence, little things shifting without my input. I blamed group chat's gossip, maybe even a nosy vendor. But no, it was Rachel. Dan found out by accident. He was checking our joint email account for a caterer's confirmation when he noticed something odd, an unfamiliar forwarding rule. Anything with the word wedding in the subject line was being copied to another email address, one we didn't recognize. I Googled it. It was Rachel's burner. I just sat there, scrolled back through the months of forwarded emails, seating charts, vendor quotes, photographer links, even the updated guest list with the security detail. She knew everything. I couldn't breathe. I felt cold. Betrayed didn't even begin to cover it. This wasn't some passive-aggressive stunt or family meddling. This was espionage. Dan looked ready to throw his laptop through a wall, but I stopped him. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to cry or retreat or explain. I wanted them to feel it. The weight of every moment they stole. Every spotlight they shoved me out of. Every time they painted me as selfish when I was just surviving. That's when I called Amy. Amy is technically my second cousin, but we always joked we were the only normal ones in the family. She'd gone low contact years ago after a blow-up over a trust fund that mysteriously disappeared from her dad's estate. Rachel had tried to blame her for it, claiming Amy was manipulating Grandma for money. Turns out Amy had receipts, literal bank receipts, and a frozen account tied to my sister's name. That should have been the end of Rachel's credibility, but Mom swept it under the rug, said Amy was misunderstood and that we should focus on healing. Amy chose peace, moved across the state, built a life without them. I should have followed her sooner. When I called and explained everything, Amy didn't sound surprised. She just sighed and said, "I've got some files you might want to see." 2 hours later, I had access to a shared folder, old emails, texts, even screen recordings of phone calls Aunt Linda didn't realize were being recorded. And there it was, the real reason Amanda wanted my venue. It wasn't some whimsical overlap. Amanda was never planning a quick ceremony. She'd been engaged for 6 months. Her wedding was supposed to be in the fall. But her venue fell through, and they couldn't get the deposit back. So Rachel offered mine. I wish I was joking. There was an email, dated 6 weeks ago, from Rachel to Amanda and Aunt Linda. "Don't worry about it. Hannah won't say no. She never does. I'll handle her. Let's just frame it as symbolic, and she'll fold." That was the moment my spine iced over. They didn't just hope I'd cave. They counted on it. I was their plan B, their backup venue, their free ride. I forwarded the email to myself, printed it, highlighted the line, "She never says no." Then I opened a new folder, Operation Reclaim. Step 1, I called the venue and requested updated security, names, times, ID checks. Anyone not on the master list turned away. No exceptions. Step 2, I contacted the photographer and had them sign an NDA, no family photos, unless I personally approved them. Step 3, I rewrote the ceremony script. My maid of honor, Dan's sister, bless her, would walk me down the aisle. No mention of my mother, no toast from Rachel, no seat saved for Amanda. Dan wanted me to stop there, said maybe I was going too far. But I hadn't even started, because the final blow wasn't legal or physical. It was emotional. I sent out an email to about 20 people, the cousins, the aunts, the neutral ones who hadn't taken sides yet. Subject line: the truth about my wedding. I kept it short. I've stayed silent for a long time. But I think you all deserve to know why certain people aren't invited to my wedding. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. It was manipulation. Repeated, intentional, and hurtful. Attached are screenshots and emails unfiltered. I've removed nothing. I'm not asking anyone to take sides, just to see the truth. If that makes you uncomfortable, I understand. I'd rather walk alone than keep pretending I was ever welcome. The fallout was nuclear. Within hours, I had 5 missed calls from Rachel, a text from Aunt Linda that said, "This is harassment," and a voicemail from my mom sobbing that I was destroying the family over some silly email. I didn't reply. I was too busy forwarding the same folder to the venue coordinator, just in case someone tried to crash. And Amy, she sent me one final message. "You're not the black sheep. You're the wolf they raised. And now they're scared you've grown teeth." The morning of my wedding was quiet. Too quiet. I kept expecting something to go wrong, rain missing flowers, a typo on the signage. But everything was perfect, eerily perfect, like the universe was holding its breath. Dan looked incredible. Calm, grounded, warm as ever. He squeezed my hand before we parted to get ready, kissed my forehead and whispered, "No matter what happens, this day is ours." That line would mean more than he knew. By 10:30 a.m., the setup was complete. Flowers, chairs, music, everything exactly as planned. We'd moved the ceremony time up by 2 hours. Our guests thought it was always meant to be that way. Only a few trusted friends knew the real reason. Security was posted at the front gates and rear staff entrance. All guests had to check in with ID. Anyone not on the master list was turned away. I didn't think they'd really try. I should have known better. At 11:10, one of the security guards radioed in, "We've got a situation at the east entrance. Bride's cousin and a few guests trying to come in. No clearance." I froze mid-step. Amy, who was zipping up my dress, didn't flinch. She handed me my phone and said, "Whatever you decide, make it final." I opened the security feed on the tablet. There she was. Amanda, dressed in white. Not ivory, not champagne. White, bridal white, holding a bouquet. Behind her, Aunt Linda face twisted in what I can only describe as suburban rage. A few vaguely familiar girls in matching dresses trailed behind like confused bridesmaids at the wrong party. Amanda was talking fast, motioning toward the entrance, waving what looked like a printed copy of an old RSVP. Security stood firm. She pulled out her phone, started tapping furiously. Seconds later, my phone buzzed. "Why are you doing this?" "We agreed you'd start later." Then another. "You're ruining my wedding." This was supposed to be symbolic. Then Aunt Linda. "You are humiliating this family. On your big day, no less. Think about what Grandma would say." I stared at the screen, thought about the years I gave up weekends, lent money, canceled my own plans to help Amanda move Rachel's kids, Mom's migraines. All the silent sacrifices that earned me nothing but the label of rigid, cold, hard to love. And now I was the villain, because I wanted one day, one moment, one vow, without being hijacked. I sent one message: leave, or I'll let security escort you, and I won't be quiet about it. Minutes later, security radioed in, "They're gone." The relief came like a wave. It didn't feel triumphant, just quiet, like something finally let go in my chest. The ceremony started on time. Dan cried when he saw me. I didn't. Not because I wasn't moved, but because I felt something deeper. Peace. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing in a space that was truly mine. No shadows, no secondhand affection. Just Dan, just me, just the life we were building from scratch. The reception was magical, joyful, safe. I didn't realize until halfway through the evening that over a third of my extended family wasn't there. Rachel never showed. My mom didn't even bother to send a text. A few cousins sent sheepish excuses about being caught in the middle. I didn't miss them. The people who mattered were there. Amy, my college roommate who flew in from Portland, Dan's entire family, loving, loud, completely obsessed with the mashed potatoes. Even my old boss who joked that I looked like I'd walked out of a Hallmark movie. The speeches were short, sweet. My maid of honor toasted choosing yourself even when it's not popular. Dan's brother told a story about the first time he realized Dan was serious about me. He stopped ghosting our group texts. And then the surprise. Midway through the dance floor chaos, Amy pulled me aside. "I thought you might want this," she said, handing me a flash drive. "What is it?" "Screenshots, texts. From a few people who tried to play both sides, including one particularly slimy group chat where Rachel called you a self-obsessed martyr and said you were probably faking tears to make Dan look good. I should have felt angry, but I didn't. I was numb to it, no wiser to it. They weren't going to change. They were never going to see me, so I leaned into the one thing I could control: my silence. 3 days after the wedding, I sent out one final email. Subject line: closure. Thank you to those who celebrated with us. For those who chose absent silence or sabotage your decision has been noted. I'm no longer interested in reconciliation explanations or repair. This was never about a wedding. It was about a pattern. I have ended it, wishing you all peace from afar. No signature, no apology, just truth. Later that week, I got a letter, handwritten, from my mom. It started with, "You've always been so sensitive," and ended with, "But we're still your family." I didn't open the rest. I folded it, placed it in a drawer labeled "Unsent Invitations." Then I went back to living. Back to Dan, to our little fixer-upper, to the garden we were planting, to the life I was finally claiming as my own. The weeks after the wedding felt like recovery after an illness I didn't know I had. I slept deeply, laughed easier. I didn't check my phone for drama. I didn't flinch at the sound of my email ping. There was a stillness in my life I had never known. Dan and I returned from our mini-moon to Asheville, and for a moment I let myself believe it was over. That the final email, the sealed wedding album, the packed-away dress, they were enough. But peace, apparently, is just another quiet before a storm. It started with a phone call. Private number. I usually ignore those, but something told me to answer. "Is this Hannah Delaney?" the woman asked, brisk and official. "Yes," I said, already bracing. "This is Karen Weston. I'm with Kinley and Weston estate attorneys. We're handling the estate of your late grandmother, Florence Delaney. I believe you're listed as a beneficiary. We need to schedule a reading." I froze. My grandma died 6 months before the wedding. Complications from pneumonia. It was sudden, but she was 91. She'd been the only one in the family who truly felt like a safe place for me growing up. Soft hands, sharp eyes, always one step ahead. I didn't even know there was a will, because apparently no one told me. We've already met with the rest of the family, the lawyer continued. There's a clause that required your presence before disclosure. You were the only one left. I booked the earliest flight I could. When I walked into the office, the mood shifted. Aunt Linda looked like she'd bitten a lemon. Rachel avoided my eyes. Amanda wasn't even pretending anymore, just scrolling on her phone like this was a nuisance. My mother pale, silent, clutching her purse like it held the last piece of her pride. The attorney nodded at me and began. The majority of the estate had already been distributed small checks, heirlooms, keepsakes, but one clause had been sealed per Grandma Florence's instructions, to be opened only if Hannah Delaney is not present at the initial reading. I almost laughed. She'd known. Even from the grave, she'd known they'd shut me out. The lawyer cleared his throat. To my granddaughter Hannah, who always brought me tea with 2 sugars, who never asked for anything unless she'd already earned it, and who I trust more than anyone in this family, I leave my house, my savings account, ending in 8721, and full rights to the Delaney family lake property. Silence. Total stinging silence. Amanda blinked. Rachel made a sound like she'd choked on her own spit. Aunt Linda stood up so fast her chair screeched. What? She shrieked. No, that's not possible, Mom promised. She amended the will 2 months before her passing. The lawyer interrupted calmly. The documents are notarized, witnessed, uncontestable. My mother looked like she might faint. I didn't say anything. Not because I didn't feel something, but because I felt everything. I'd spent so long convincing myself that I didn't need validation from them, that I could live without ever being seen. But in that moment, I realized someone had seen me all along. My grandmother had known. She saw through the manipulation, the performative tears, the crocodile compassion, and she made sure the truth would be carved into legal stone. After the meeting, my mom followed me out. Hannah, wait, she said. She looked small, exhausted, old in a way I'd never noticed before. You don't have to accept it all, she said, voice barely above a whisper. We could figure something out, together, like we ever were. I looked her dead in the eye and said I didn't take anything. It was given to me, and I'm not giving it back. She blinked, stunned, then tried again. But what will people think? And that's when I smiled. Hopefully the truth. I walked away. Didn't run, didn't cry. Just walked. Like I was finally stepping out of a story someone else wrote for me, and into one I was writing for myself. That weekend, Dan and I visited the lake house. It needed work peeling paint, a few cracked windows, but the view was still breathtaking. The same view Grandma and I used to sit beside with mugs of tea and slices of pound cake. I stood on that porch and felt the wind shift. Not just the breeze, but something in my bones. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a placeholder. I felt like a woman who had finally taken up space. Not because anyone allowed it, but because I stopped asking. Story 2. Dad sent me a letter. We are gifting David the family house. I didn't receive an invitation to the will reading. They arrived at my door months later. You and the family must live together. Not any longer, replied my lawyer as he came forward. I appreciate you being with me today. Wherever you are, I hope you're enjoying your day. If you could let me know in the comments the city or nation you're viewing from, and what time it is there, that would be greatly appreciated. Let's start our story together now. People like myself who are born to mend things have a term for them. The family is us. The emergency money, the glue, and the 2 a.m. phone call, the ones in charge. That was who I was and what I did for 35 years. I was the fixer, Mark. And the one who was always broken was my older brother, David. Since we were little, things had been that way. He was the enchanting, frenzied tempest. I was the solid, silent refuge. He would use a baseball to smash a window, and I would be the one to gently explain to Dad that it was an accident and accept half the responsibility in order to make things easier for him. In our family's operating system, our parents viewed it as a feature rather than a defect. David is quite endearing. All he needs is a good break. Susan, my mother, would sigh while wearing a longing expression. Michael, my father, would just nod in agreement. He was a guy whose quiet was a language unto itself. They then faced me. You're very smart, Mark. You'll be all right forever. It was not a praise. A life sentence was imposed. Because I was reasonable, I lost out on a coveted summer internship in Germany when I was 19. An opportunity that might change the life of a young software developer. At the age of 22, David had experienced yet another catastrophe. This one has to do with some extremely upset folks and a poker debt. I recall our tiny home being filled with the aroma of my mother's anxiety baking cinnamon and despair. With a typical tired disappointment on his face, my father paced the kitchen's linoleum floor. I saved money for my vacation, but they didn't ask for it. They were not required to. With tears in my mother's eyes, they just sat me down at the kitchen table and explained that David's delicate disposition was unable to withstand this level of stress. My father said, staring at the floor, "He made a mistake. Mark, he's simply not as suited to the world as you are." I then handed them the cash, in exchange for a pat on the shoulder and the smothering pleasure of knowing that I had once again prevented the family from capsizing. I watched my dream vanish in a Western Union transfer. This has a compounding impact over years. It was a gradual loss of identity. My goals were never my first priority. My savings. For David's next big failure, a slush money. He floated between schemes to make quick money, leaving a trail of unfulfilled promises and irate investors in his wake. And I was the backstop through it all, the fixer for the family. When I'm alone, in my tiny flat alone, I occasionally let my resentment to surface. One person gets how many right breaks. And why did my needs constantly come last? Because I was sensitive. I would always shove it down, though. It was my responsibility. It was family. Then something changed last year. I earned a sizable bonus at work after a demanding project. I didn't regard it as a safeguard against David's next catastrophe for the first time. I noticed a door, a tiny one, but one that was exclusively for me. I lived like a monk for 3 months, combining that bonus with all of the money I had ever saved. And I succeeded. 35, I purchased a home of my own. Not a mansion, not even close. Just a little 2-bedroom home with a large enough backyard for a dog I hadn't adopted yet and a crooked porch. I owned it. My own effort and postponed goals paid for every shingle and floorboard. The act seemed holy and weighty in my glove compartment as I drove to my parents' house with the TV humming in the background. I discovered them in the living room. The smell of my father's pipe tobacco and old recollections filled the air. "Dad, Mom," my voice was tight with apprehensive pride as I spoke. "I've got some updates. I purchased a home." From her knitting, my mother raised her head. "Oh," she responded in a flat voice. "That's lovely, my love. Just watch how you spend your money." My dad simply nodded while keeping his gaze fixed on the TV. David laughed briefly, without amusement, as he sat on the couch, browsing through his phone. He said, "Look at Mr. Big Shot," without raising his gaze. "Remember your little brother." My chest's warmth changed to cold. No congrats were offered, no arrogance, just a sneer and a warning. It seemed as though my success was a bother, a disturbance of the status quo, in which I was the provider, rather than an individual with a life of his own. 2 weeks later, the main blow was delivered. There was no phone call. It was not a discussion. It was a plain business envelope with one sheet of inexpensive copy paper. The front bears the spidery handwriting of my father. I opened it while my heart pounded against my ribs in a steady, heavy pace. The letter was brief and ruthlessly official. I was notified that their will had been formally revised. The household, the home where I was raised. David was given complete control over the area on the doorframe where each height marker belonged to me. The reasoning in the letter was a twist of a knife. David requires the stability my father had written since he is a sensitive person. And Mark, you've shown that you can do it alone. We're really pleased. You don't require our assistance. The words "don't require our assistance" felt as though a door had slammed into my face. Not a compliment. As though someone had wrapped my lungs in barbed wire, my chest constricted. My lungs hurt. All of a sudden, the air was too heavy to breathe. "You are not commended for your strength. For that, you are penalized." I staggered back and took a seat on my newly vacant couch. The letter shuddered in my grasp. They had not just handed the home to David. They had erased me on the pretext of my own sacrifice and bravery. I attempted making a voicemail call. I tried the voicemail on my mom's cell phone. David texted me a few minutes later, and my phone buzzed. "Heard about the residence. I'm sorry, buddy." What little air I had left was taken away by its careless brutality. A month later, I received the ultimate insult, the one that really tore the last ragged thread of my filial obligation. A cousin informed me that the choice had been formally made during an informal family gathering that included a will announcement. My father's brother, Uncle Joe, had been present. I hadn't received an invitation. "According to your mother, you would just find it too distressing." In a sympathetic voice, my cousin informed me over the phone. "It was for the best," Joe remarked. "Since you've always been so self-reliant, self-sufficient." There was no description. It was exile, a dismissal. I had never felt more alone than I did as I stood in the center of my own living room, sunshine pouring through windows of a home I had struggled for. I scrolled through years of phony grins and holidays where I felt more like a visitor than a son as I glanced at the family pictures on my phone. It was more than a home. It was erased, as if the contributions I had made during my life had been inscribed in invisible ink. I told Sarah, my best friend, about it. She was the only person who had ever experienced my family dynamic in its whole. We had met in college. After I was done, she remained silent on the phone for a while, and I could hear her quick intake of air. Her voice vibrated with rage as she continued, "Mark." I was still unable to access myself. "Mark, they're not simply blind. They are consciously deciding to be. Not only is this unjust, it is inhumane." I composed an email to my folks that evening while seated at my new kitchen counter. I let it all out. The years of sacrifice, the lost chances, and the intense heartbreaking pain of being so carelessly cast aside. I described every dollar, every bailed-out catastrophe, and every hope that was dashed. 3 pages of unadulterated suffering. However, my finger lingered over the submit button when I finished. A small, stupid piece of me. This would just make matters worse. The part of him that still craved his parents' acceptance said that perhaps, just possibly, they might see their error if I remained silent and waited. The letter was preserved in my drafts, a memorial to a discussion that would never take place. The fight wasn't done, but I didn't realize it at the time. I hadn't merely lost anything to them. They would soon come take what was left of me. A thick, resonant stillness characterized the months that followed the letter. They didn't contact me, and neither did I. It served as a silent affirmation of my banishment. I plunged headfirst into my new life, a refugee who is trying to escape his own family. My home turned to become a haven for me. I applied a continuous serene gray paint job to the walls. The solid feel of the wood beneath my hands was a welcome diversion from the phantom limb ache of my broken family ties as I spent a weekend putting together a bookshelf. I wasn't filling a financial gap or saving for a crisis for the first time. I was constructing a personal project. I started going to a therapist on Sarah's recommendation. Dr. Albright is a gentle, straightforward woman who works in a quiet office with the aroma of brewing tea and old books. I started to unpack the baggage of 35 years. I picked up new vocabulary, such as pontification and measurement. I realized that being the fixer wasn't a noble profession. It wasn't working properly, one that had permitted my parents to neglect their own obligations and permitted David's unending immaturity. In our 3rd session, Dr. Albright informed me that you weren't born with common sense, Mark. You were taught to be. There is a distinction. I began to make small, conscious decisions that were completely my own. I purchased an abstract painting of swirling blues and greens and hung it in my living room. Sam is the name I gave to a cute but awkward retriever mix that I adopted from the neighborhood shelter. The quiet mornings on my porch sipping coffee with Sam's head in my lap were a world away from the chaotic, anxiety-fueled breakfasts of my childhood. The first test of my new resolve came on a Tuesday afternoon. My phone buzzed, and my mother's name flashed on the screen. A familiar knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep breath, and answered. Her voice was sugary sweet, a tone she always used before making a request. "Mark, darling." "How are you?" "I'm okay, Mom. What's up?" "Well, it's David." His car broke down. The poor thing. And he has a very important job interview tomorrow across town. He was just wondering, could he possibly borrow your car for a few days? And maybe if you could spare it help with the repair bill. He's just so stressed. The Mark of 6 months ago would have said yes without a second thought. But as I stood there in my own kitchen, looking at the life I was building, I felt a new strength solidify in my spine. My heart was pounding a frantic drum against my ribs, but my voice was steady. "I'm sorry, Mom, I can't lend out my car right now and my finances are tight." Silence. The sweetness in her voice curdled. "Oh," she said, the single word dripping with ice. "I see. Some things never change." She hung up. I stood there for a full minute. Phone in hand, my body trembling. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. I had held a boundary. The cold disapproval in her voice hurt, but the surge of self-respect that followed was a revelation. A few weeks later, while organizing old financial records for Dr. Albright, I stumbled upon something strange. Tucked into a folder of old tax returns was a faded carbon copy receipt from a decade ago. It was for a wire transfer of $15,000 from my parents' joint account to a company. I'd never heard of Apex Solutions Group. The date was right around the time of David's first spectacular business failure, the one that had cost me my internship money. The sum was far larger than I had ever been told. I had given them $3,000. Where had this other money come from, and where had it gone? It was a puzzle piece that didn't fit a loose thread in the family narrative. I photographed it with my phone and put it aside, a sense of unease prickling my skin. Life settled back into its quiet rhythm. Then, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, the fragile piece was shattered. A car I didn't recognize, a late model sedan that was nicer than anything my parents had ever owned, pulled into my driveway. My parents and David got out. My stomach plummeted. They hadn't called, they hadn't texted. They just emerged like a storm brewing on the horizon. I met them on the porch, Sam snarling gently beside me. My mother's visage was a mask of forced civility. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. David looked bored and irritated, as if being there was an imposition. "Mark, we need to discuss." My mother began omitting any niceties. "What is it?" I asked, my voice flat. "It's David," she remarked, her voice starting to shake. "His business, the one you co-signed the loan for. It didn't work. The creditors are constantly phoning. Our house is in danger of being repossessed. They had handed him the home." I nearly laughed at the irony, since it was so sour. Toward last, my father's speech was a low murmur aimed toward his shoes. "We've been thinking, son. This large mansion is all yours. Until David gets back on his feet, your mother and I may have to move in with you, David." I was dumbfounded when I looked at them. The unadulterated savagery of it was astounding. I spoke carefully, the words tasting like poison. "Let me get this straight. You excluded me entirely when you handed David the family house. You want to move in with me now that he's about to lose it?" My mom's expression grew stern. The victim act disappeared. Righteous indignation took its place. "The least you can do is this. Your brother has nothing to share with you while you have so much. We are related." She let out a cry using the word as a weapon. After being silent, David eventually smirked and added something. "Mark, don't be self-centered. The home is large." Something shattered inside of me at that moment. It came with a frigid, silent snap rather than a crash. I just wilted and died the part of myself that had always yearned for their favor, that had twisted and twisted itself for them. "No." I said. Despite being modest, my voice carried the weight of years of unspoken animosity. "This is my home, no. I earned it. For it, I made sacrifices. The conversation is done. Don't speak to your mother in that manner." My dad finally found his voice and snapped. "You're being self-centered." My mom let out a cry. "With your negativity, you're destroying this family." "Tearing it to pieces?" I asked, letting forth a genuine disbelieving chuckle. "When you penned the letter, you ripped it to pieces. Please leave my property now." As though I had grown a second head, they gazed at me. The fixer was no longer me. I was unknown. They pulled out of my driveway in their lovely automobile, fuming with anger. My mother's last words echoed in the air, yelled through the open window. "Mark, you'll regret this. Our lawyer will be contacting you. This is something you owe us." It seemed to me like a meaningless threat. A lifetime of emotional battle culminates in one spectacular volley. I was mistaken. A certified letter came a week later. An official note from a law firm was inside. I had no idea. David and my parents were suing me. They were asking to get a controlling stake in my home. The legal foundation was so perverse and evil, it left me speechless. They were bringing up my grandmother's little bequest from years ago. David's first unsuccessful firm was the one in which I had been forced to invest. They had a document, a notarized declaration, that I barely recall signing when I was 20, and they said it was a family seed money for my future. They had presented it as a straightforward acknowledgement of receiving the money, believing it to be only a formality for the distribution of the bequest. Its ambiguous and deceptive wording, such as "in consideration of family support" and "for the future benefit of the family unit," suggested that any substantial asset I obtained would be regarded as shared family property, according to their counsel. With the letter in my fingers, I collapsed into the floor of my kitchen. My skin felt like it was being burned by the paper. It was no longer about a house. It was about taking responsibility for my life. This was the last thing they did. They would just steal whatever I mended for themselves if I weren't their fixer. It was more than simply a lawsuit. From my own blood, it was a statement of war. There was an audible split in my spirit when the final thread of filial allegiance broke. I grabbed my phone. I was having trouble dialing since my fingers were shaking so much. On the first ring, Sarah responded, "I'm being sued." With my voice cracking, I whispered, "My residence is the subject of their lawsuit." She fell silent for a while after I gave her the rundown, then swore so fiercely I was shocked. "Mark that paper as fake. It was forced into being signed, on false pretenses. It is what it is." Anger was a lifeline for her. It sliced through my hopelessness and replaced it with something else. Hard, cold determination. A battle is what they want. They will receive one. I opened the email draft that I had composed months prior, the one that was full of pain and cries for sympathy. I removed it. Everything. I then began a new one. It was succinct, objective, and factual. It described the lawsuit, their demands, and the years of funding. The final line was straightforward. "I've hired legal advice to deal with this. Never get in touch with me personally again." My finger moved without hesitation. I sent it. Now there was no going back. Mr. Evans's legal office was just what you would expect. Dark wood books with leather bindings, and the solemn, commanding smell of ancient paper and real money. Mr. Evans stood in sharp contrast to his environment. A man in his late 50s, he had a serene manner and unblinking gaze. I told him the whole nasty background, and he listened attentively. My fists gripped in my lap, and occasionally my voice cracked. I slipped a copy of the notarized paper they were using and the legal notification across his shiny desk. His expression was inscrutable as he read it slowly. Finally, his voice steady, he replied, "Mark, this is a predatory claim. Its purpose is to intimidate you into submitting. Their primary weapon is the document, although its provenance is questionable. Instead of enduring the psychological and monetary toll of battling your own family in court, they are counting on you to give up." He peered over the top of his spectacles at me. "Are you ready to engage in combat?" Yes, I did say the word, feeling more grounded and genuine than I have in years. "I've finished folding." "Excellent." He gave a nod. "Dismantling their narrative is the first thing we do. We must demonstrate a pattern of emotional coercion and financial exploitation." The ensuing weeks were a somber lesson. Digging through dusty boxes of old bank statements, credit card bills, and emails, I turned into an archaeologist of my own life. Every receipt for a loan to David and every email my mother sent me, downplaying his shortcomings while putting pressure on me for money, was proof. I sent them all over to Mr. Evans. Every mouse click is a tiny act of defiance. I had to relive every compromise and every surrender because of the exhausting nature of the task. But I started to feel more like a strategy and less like a victim with every bit of evidence. I discovered it once more while searching. The $15,000 wire transfer to Apex Solutions Group in faded carbon copy. I sent a message and a photo of it to Mr. Evans based on my instinct. This dates back to David's first significant setback. He simply needed $3,000, so I handed it to them. "I have no idea what this is." Mr. Evans responded in less than an hour. "This is intriguing. Let me investigate." That poisonous and unavoidable network, the family grapevine, started to swirl just as I was beginning to feel a glimmer of control. My mother's estranged sister, my Aunt Patty, sent me a message on social media. This was an urgent communication, whereas her first had been hesitant. I've heard that the litigation has escalated, Mark. David always blinded your mother. However, his fingerprints are all over this. In a way that goes beyond her typical indulgence. It's a desperate situation. We must speak clearly. Halfway between our houses, at a quiet, unnamed coffee shop, we first met. Aunt Patty appeared to be older than I had recalled. I was just now starting to comprehend the grief that was imprinted on her face. I felt an immediate connection to this lady I hardly knew, who had been banished far earlier than I had. I stopped talking to your mother 17 years ago. Her hands were shaking as she started to mix her tea. David was to blame. At the age of 21, he was heavily involved in a computer business that was too good to ignore. Their money was not the only thing he lost. He became involved with some extremely shady characters. He nearly put them out of business. She gave me a direct glance. Susan, I told your mom, let him confront it. Give him time to learn. I advised your father to stand his ground and be a man. However, they refused. To save him, they pledged their future. They gave him the riskiest lesson of all by doing this, that he will not face any repercussions, that he could control them at any time. She spoke in a whisper as she leaned in closer. But Mark, it was worse than that. Susan contacted me distraught a few weeks after the entire incident. David had threatened them, she said. He threatened to reveal how they had been underpaying taxes for years in order to provide him with seed money for his previous scams. If they didn't save him and continue to fund him. How? Your dad had been manipulating his accounting for his tiny business. David did not only request their assistance. For it, he blackmailed them. Since then, they have had to be extremely cautious. He learned to use their fear and their naive pride as weapons because he was terrified of him. I exhaled the air. Everything fell into place. They were afraid. Their desperate attempt to please David, their readiness to give me up. The only son incapable of harming them. To satisfy whoever could, my phone buzzed while I was contemplating this shocking revelation. Mr. Evans sent the email. As I opened it, my heart pounded against my ribs. Subject: Apex Solutions Group. I conducted some research, Mark. In 2008, Apex Solutions Group was identified as a shell company linked to a small-scale investment fraud scam. Since no significant charges were ever brought, a silent settlement was probably struck. It appears that David wasn't just saved from a failing company. He was rescued from a potentially illegal circumstance. Presumably, the $15,000 payment was hush money intended to silence a person or resolve a legal issue. Family drama is not the only aspect of this. We are in a position of power. After reading the email again, I realized that Mr. Evans' finding and Patty's story were both parts of the same unpleasant reality. After a wave of nausea, I had an odd, icy clarity. My parents were more than simply frail. They were weakened. In addition, my brother preyed on his own family members. There was more to the lawsuit than just greed. People who had long since lost control did it out of desperation. Mr. Evans's conference room served as the venue for the settlement meeting. Unspoken animosity pervaded the air. The large mahogany table had my parents seated on one side. Peterson, their lawyer, was a cocky-looking man. Next to them, David appeared bored and arrogant, much like my Uncle Joe. For moral support, ever the faithful foot soldier sat just behind them. Mr. Evans sat next to me, while I sat across from them. I looked into my mother's eyes. Her eyes had a flinty resolution instead of warmth. Peterson opened with a silky, patronizing voice. He discussed family responsibilities, the law's spirit, and the obvious purpose of the contract I had signed as a young, gullible guy. My mom used a tissue to dab at her eyes. She had spent decades honing her act of resentful parenting. When he was done, Mr. Evans started his response coolly. He provided documents of checks and bank transfers that documented my years of financial support. He provided them with all the proof, including my parents' deceptive emails and David's wheedling SMS. I noticed a glimmer of uncertainty in Peterson's eyes. David and my parents simply appeared more and more irate. The distortion is this. My mom let out a cry. He is our son. He ought to wish to assist us. His home must be shared. It's the only thing that's Christian." Mr. Evans stopped her by raising a hand. Slowly, he stood a subtle call to attention. His voice was calm but heavy as he answered, "Actually, Mrs. Miller, he doesn't. Furthermore, considering the somewhat erratic financial activity related to your son David's previous business endeavors, particularly those involving a company called Apex Solutions Group in 2008, and some of the documented pressures he has placed on you, perhaps taking this issue further would expose you to a level of scrutiny that none of you would want." He left the words lingering. A folder he slipped across the table. It included a printout of the public material on the Apex Solutions Group fraud probe, 2 AMP patties, and copies of my mother's distress letters. He made no direct accusations against them. He was not required to. A nuclear bomb in the middle of the table was implied. Both of my parents' faces lost their color. It appeared as though my father could be genuinely ill. David caught my mother's attention. She had an expression of sheer, unmitigated fear. Broken David's haughty facade gave way to unadulterated terror. Uncle Joe seems very confused as well. Mr. Evans pressed his advantage after realizing that he was a piece in a far darker game than he realized. He had a voice like icy steel. "My customer is willing to completely abandon this issue. He will withdraw from this pointless and nefarious lawsuit and demand no compensation. In exchange, you will promise to stop all communication until he or his legal representatives begin it, and you will sign a complete and final release of all claims against him and his property. There is no bargaining here." He looked at his timepiece. "I advise you to take 5 minutes to make up your mind, but you have an hour to do so." The battle was finished. Both they and I were aware of it. No place remained for them to hide. Mr. Evans's ultimatum was met with a silence that was more weighty than any argument. It was the sound of a dysfunctional dynasty imploding on its own. The arrogant lawyer Peterson was now pale and desperately speaking to my parents, as though they were poisonous snakes. David gazed at the papers on the table. My mother shifted her gaze between my father and David. Her expression was one of betrayal and terror. Finally, the actual cost of their pact was becoming apparent to both the facilitator and the protector. It was not an hour. 5 minutes was hardly enough. My father's shoulders slumped in defeat as their hushed, desperate meeting came to an end. Peterson cleared his throat, losing all of the confidence he had before. "I have clients that are willing to accept your terms." Mr. Evans gave a sharp nod and presented the pre-prepared settlement documents. He placed them and 2 pencils on the table. With no sense of victory in his voice, he replied, "Sign here and here." Purely professional. The only sound in the room was the scratching of their pens. David was the first to sign a jerky, angry writing on his hand. It was a wobbly signature from my father, a defeated man's signature. Last was my mom. She set down the pen with a shaking hand. Tears of anger and self-pity filled her eyes as she gazed at me. "Mark!" she said in a tremulous tone. "How could you harm your own like this? I stopped her in her tracks." The chair scraped lightly on the floor as I got to my feet. I stared at her with a strange cold calm instead of the rage that had been feeding me for weeks. I cut off my voice to speak to my own family. "Steady. How could you, Mother? That's the actual question. For many years." "It's over." Without looking back, I turned and left the meeting room. There was no need for me to see them again. I didn't have to listen to any more words. The cool, antiseptic air of the corridor seemed like the first clean breath I had ever taken in my life as the heavy door snapped shut behind me. There was no spectacular aftermath. There was silence. My family's quiet, which used to be a punishment. Now it was a present. The rage that had been burning in my stomach for months gradually subsided, leaving behind a deep and comforting calm instead of emptiness. Sarah was ecstatic. With Sam sleeping at our feet, we celebrated on my slanting porch after she brought over a bottle of champagne. "To fresh starts, Mark," she added, her eyes gleaming. "You succeeded. You did it truly, really." We spoke for hours, not only about my triumph, but also about her own modest yet effective attempts to establish limits with her parents. She had been inspired by my liberation. and it seemed to be the most significant result of all. Aunt Patty sent me a brief note a few days later. "Excellent work. Your granny would be pleased. Give me a call sometime." Yes, I did. We spent more than an hour discussing common ground with exiles. I had discovered a fragment of my family, a composition based on respect and honesty rather than duty and anxiety. As usual, word of the others filtered via the family gossip. I learned that the parents had to sell the family house, after all, from a relative who was impartial and only wanted to communicate the news. The extent of David's obligations was far greater than they had initially thought. Across town, they occupied a tiny claustrophobic rented flat. She had heard that David had departed the state, leaving them to do one more cleanup of his trash. I experienced a fleeting, faraway sympathy for the two individuals in that flat, but it was soon overshadowed by the conviction that their destiny was a direct result of their own decisions. Their demise was a silent admission of the consequences rather than a victory. I saw Uncle Joe at the grocery store a few months later. His face went white when he spotted me in the vegetable section. He wrung his hands anxiously and came toward me. "Mark." His voice was heavy as he began. "Regarding your parents." The old Mark would have listened and taken in the shame that was going to be dealt to him. Not the new Mark. I smiled at him, a little courteous smile that stopped short of my eyes. "Uncle Joe." I spoke in a forceful yet kind tone. "I now have a relationship of my own with them. I hope all is okay with you." I pushed my cart past him, nodded, and continued to go. There was another modest, silent win at another border. More than a year has passed. My home has evolved beyond a simple wooden and nail framework. It's a haven. The sound of tranquility has replaced the quiet that once made me uneasy. My business concept isn't just a pipe dream anymore. On my desk is a business idea. I'm with a lovely woman who respects the boundaries I've established around my life and is aware of my past. She recognizes their purpose, not because she wishes to dismantle them. I discovered that although the suffering was great, it made me stronger, a self-esteem for which I could never be sued. At first, my parents' quiet was terrible, but eventually, it became the background music for my liberation. I discovered that leaving people who don't value you might sometimes be the most self-loving thing you can do. Instead of being based on the changing sands of duty and shame, my family is now chosen and founded on the firm foundation of honesty and support. They attempted to take me home, but ultimately they saved my life. It raises the question, how much does peace cost? When do you ultimately determine that you have made enough payments? I would be interested in knowing whether any of you have ever had to redo the family map. Story 3. I'm Marcus, and I'm 32. And my family members would definitely characterize me as quiet if you asked them to. Not in an introspective, enigmatic manner. Just the one that never truly takes up space, never raises his voice, and never creates trouble. As if I were a domestic utility, my mother has a tendency of referring to me as the assistants. With a half smile, she says it, as if she's pleased. However, her tone is always contemptuous, as if she were talking about a coffee table that had been for ages, beneficial, recognizable, and simple to forget. Except when it gets in the way. The golden child wasn't me. Melanie, my younger sister, played that role. The professional attention-getter who may wind up on the family Christmas card cover after blinking at a camera. Then there was Jared, my elder brother, loud and charismatic. He never paid for his own alcohol and always had a tale to tell. Me, I'm employed in data analysis. Live by yourself. No drama, no children. Just a good credit score and a clean refrigerator. My cousin Emily got engaged a few months ago, which is where this narrative begins. Now, Emily and I don't really get along. At one point, she called me the person who works with computers or numbers or whatever. However, she invited me to a fancy downtown restaurant for her engagement dinner. The email list under +1, optional if you can find someone, had my name, Emily Classic. I did, however, RSVP, yes. There was a part of me that hoped things may be different. My folks would be present. Along with a few aunts, uncles, and other relatives, Jared and Melanie were also there. Most of them I hadn't seen in months. I reasoned that it would be courteous to show up. My ex used to claim that I looked like a CEO in training when I wore the blue blazer. I saw right away that everyone was sitting when I got there. Not all of them, actually. One seat remained vacant. It was a tiny crooked bar stool, the sort where the light flickers between the staff kitchen and the lavatory door. Waiters are constantly rubbing trays against your back, and the air has a little industrial soap odor. My mother waved Marcus over here when she saw me. She made the call and then added her loud stage whisper, which she employs to make it sound like she's kidding, but isn't. Take a seat, it is nearer the exit. In this manner, you avoid damaging any pictures. A few people looked around. Behind her wineglass, my sister laughed. Jared grinned. My father continued to munch without raising his eyes. I stood there for a while, taking everything in without saying a word. Then I approached, drew out the stool, and sat silently. I attempted to feel the heat in my cheeks to keep cool during supper, folded my napkin gently, and grinned at the waiter. I didn't say much. The discussion drifted around me, and I just listened. Announcements of a baby wedding preparations and tales from Jared's most recent vacation to Cancun. I was pleased of a predictive model I created for a significant logistics firm when I attempted to comment on a recent assignment. "Wow!" exclaimed Melanie, blinking. "That sounds complicated." The conversation suddenly turned back to Jared's recent tattoo. A toast to Emily and her fiancé was once made by a family friend. Clinking glasses. My chair swayed. I felt like a piece of furniture, just a solid foundation. Jared ordered 2 rounds of drinks for the table, and I watched. Without checking the price, my dad ordered the chef's special. The server was requested to package 3 additional desserts for my mom to take home for later. The check then arrived. In the center of the table was a sleek black folder. After a moment of hesitation, the waiter shouted it right in front of me. Everyone fell silent. Slowly, I raised my gaze. Melanie gave a blink. Jared's eyes were fixed on his phone. My mother remarked, "You don't mind, do you?" while clearing her throat. "You always handle money so responsibly," I added calmly. "Don't worry, I wouldn't dare ruin the symmetry of your check either," as I leaned back in my wobbly little stool. Then I got to my feet. Nobody made a move. Melanie hissed and I heard it. "Even so, what does that mean?" she muttered. When Jared did glance up, he whispered, "Dude, chill." However, I had already started to go toward the entrance. I didn't bid them farewell, didn't turn around, simply strolled outside into the cool evening breeze. Behind me, I could hear the noises of muted disputes starting to bubble. It was not the first time such an incident has occurred. Something about that moment, but not even near. About the expectation about the stillness. The fact that nobody even asked if I should cover everyone's expenses. It struck in a different way. And I sensed a change for the first time in my adult life. Not rage, that's right, not even grief, just a calculated finality silent. It's like turning the final page of a book you've been reading for years out of duty. I didn't immediately return home. Rather, I strolled 2 blocks to a little 24-hour diner that had a fragrance similar to pancake syrup and burned coffee. The type of establishment that didn't give a damn about your identity or attire. You only requested a booth and perhaps a few refills. I opened my phone, got a black coffee, and sat in the corner. Mom had already texted messages in the family group chat. "Marcus, that was impolite. At least you could have made an offer." Jared sent a text. "A very sophisticated dude, leaving us dangling in public like that." Melanie sent a text. "Be less theatrical." After one supper, nothing happened. Nobody expressed regret. Nobody claimed to understand. Just a silent hope that I would be the one to assist again. The simple one. They may make fun of it. In the same sentence, lean on and disregard. For several minutes, I gazed at the screen. I looked at something else after opening my banking app. While Jared was taking unaffordable holidays and Melanie was sharing unpacking hauls from expensive labels, she couldn't pronounce a healthy savings account had been meticulously accumulated over the previous 10 years. Alone in silence, I had been constructing something solid. Perhaps, though, it was time to cease being so silent. I began plucking threads the following morning. I started by removing Jared as an authorized user over the phone with my credit card provider. 3 years earlier, when he only required a short-term bump to the score, I had promised to do him that favor. He had earned thousands of dollars from streaming services. takeout and bar charges, although he consistently claimed to be working things out. On the line was my name, no more. I then went to the family's Netflix account and signed in. Indeed, the billing profile had the name of whom, mine. Thus, I modified the password. Next is the family plan for Disney Plus Spotify. Amazon Prime was shared. I took back one by one the items that they had sloppily thought belonged to everyone, but actually belonged to me. The big one came next. You see, I had consented to co-sign a modest business loan my parents were taking out to grow my dad's landscaping firm around a year ago, after much begging on their part. They couldn't be approved by the bank alone. With my signature, it went through, even though that credit had inconsistent income. Not even a thank you letter was sent to me. I recalled the provision that permitted a co-sign owner to start a liability review during the first 12 months of that loan, which was still in its early phases. Technically, it was legal if fraud or misrepresentation could be proven, but it was uncommon and hidden in fine print. Thus, I engaged a lawyer. It wasn't even about bankrupting the company or ruining their credit. I had no desire for vengeance, not in the sense of fire and brimstone. Distance, legal, financial, emotional, and a fresh start were what I desired. In the meantime, the texts continued to arrive. Mom sent an SMS. Your father's dream is this. Don't let a dinner check ruin it. Melanie sent a text. Are you really interrupting us because of a single offensive joke? Jared sent a text. Regarding this, you're acting like a little girl. Adult up. The best one, however, was when Emily, the soon-to-be bride, left me a voicemail 2 days later. Marcus, hello? I've heard that the dinner became tense. I wanted to inform you that the wedding guest list is currently being finalized. We're going to have to decline your invitation because there isn't much room. I hope you get it. Click. No shock, no anger, just some clarity. That gave me the last push I required. I launched a private browser window and began researching something I had been secretly hoping to do for years. Relocating actually means going to a different state, not just a different neighborhood, perhaps even outside the nation. Somewhere I wasn't required to be a supporting character in someone else's narrative. I might just be Marcus somewhere. I sent one last message to the family group chat later that week. No threats, no explanations. Just please remove me from any future financial obligations or shared accounts. All access has been revoked. I wish you the best moving forward. Melanie left a thumbs down emoji. Jared replied, LOL, okay. My mom didn't respond at all. I waited that Friday. My dad called. I let it ring out. Then he texted me. Can we talk about the loan thing? It's urgent. Then Jared called, then Melanie. By the time Monday rolled around, I had 17 missed calls and 4 emails with subject lines like, family emergency, please call, and we need to resolve this ASAP. But I was already 3 states away, sipping a hotel coffee and watching the sunrise from a balcony I'd paid for with my own money, with zero guilt. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. They weren't just mad, they were scared. And the best part, I hadn't even played my final card yet. I spent the next 2 weeks in Asheville, North Carolina. It was supposed to be a pit stop, a breather, before I figured out my next move. But the crisp mountain air and quiet pace suited me. The silence from my family didn't last long. It started with guilt. Mom sent an SMS. I just don't understand why you're punishing all of us. We love you, Marcus. Families argue. It doesn't mean you run away. Then it turned manipulative. Melanie sent a text. I hope you're happy. Dad's losing sleep over this. Jared's credit score dropped. And don't even get me started on Mom. She's sick with worry. And finally, when none of that worked, came the fury. Jared sent a text. You seriously think you're better than us now? You think money makes you important? You're just a bitter little worm who got lucky with a boring desk job. That one actually made me laugh. It was so on brand, so cartoonishly predictable. I nearly spilled my coffee. Meanwhile, the fallout was growing behind the scenes. Remember the business loan I co-signed? My lawyer had uncovered that they had misrepresented their projected income and fabricated some invoice totals. That alone didn't trigger legal action, but it did flag the loan for reassessment. When the bank caught wind, they initiated a formal review and froze access to the remaining funds until it was sorted out. That meant the renovation project they'd started new trucks, new office space, some flashy landscaping equipment was now half finished and hemorrhaging cash. My dad had tied up their savings into the expansion without access to the full loan. They were in trouble. I knew all of this because one of my cousins, Erica, had quietly reached out. She wasn't part of the engagement dinner drama. She'd been traveling for work, but heard the stories flying around the family group chats. She called me one night and said, "Okay, I've stayed out of it long enough." "What actually happened, Marcus?" "Because they're making it sound like you went full villain." So I told her everything, not in a rant, not with fury, just facts. What they said, what they did, how they treated me like a wallet with ears. How, after years of being their backup plan, I finally said no. There was a long stillness on the line. Then she added gently, "I believe you, and I'm sorry I wasn't there." We spoke for an hour. It was the first meaningful chat I'd had with a family member in months. That didn't leave me feeling smaller when we hung up. I spent a lot of time staring at the ceiling and felt something I hadn't felt in years, yet I didn't weep. Observed. The wedding followed. Emily's. Even with the previous uninvite, my mom's Gmail still occasionally forwards emails to me. Last-minute information, registry connections, seating charts have been updated. I suppose no one had considered taking me out by hand. I learned that Jared was making a toast in this way. I made a final attempt when Melanie was a bridesmaid, and my dad was paying for the photographer's premium package. A calculated, low-key joke. As you can see, Brian Emily's fiancé is employed at a mid-sized computer business in marketing. He has ambition, out loud. Additionally, I recently learned this after a little LinkedIn research. I'm also looking for a new position at my organization. For a job that was only 2 teams over for mine, he was really 2 rounds into the interview process. The way the cosmos presently plays its cards is funny. I was not trying to ruin his chances. I made a point of bringing it up in a call with HR, even though I didn't have to. Due diligence is more important than gossip. "Hey," I remarked nonchalantly. "Brian Jenkins is in the last stages then. Just so you know, we have socially crossed paths. It's only a familial link, nothing major. He may recognize me as the reserved one. However, complete disclosure and everything." HR acknowledged it and thanked me. That was it. Not a drama. Don't push. However, it indicated that they dig and what they would discover, particularly the appearance of his name on some of Jared's more colorful postings on social media. They might even halt. This fool slipped on the bill and set the family loan on fire, especially the one earlier that week when Jared sent a grainy picture of me from a wedding years ago with the message, "Some folks, I suppose, were destined to be letdowns." Melanie Emily was tagged. Bryant, public, no filter. I didn't have to do any work. Asheville again. At last, I signed the lease for a modest yet contemporary flat with a view of the river. Quiet neighbors, spotless walls, and plenty room to stretch and reflect. On the morning of the ceremony, 2 days prior to the wedding, I moved in. I had 15 missed calls when I woke up. Then Erica sent the text. "You won't believe what transpired at the reception just now." And I grinned as I opened the message and saw what she had written. Nor a gloating smile, nor a mean one. It's the type that happens when the scales begin to balance on their own. Erica's message was brief, hurried, and exuberant. An hour prior to the ceremony, Brian was taken from the wedding. When she arrived, a woman from his company, HR or something, asked to have a private conversation with him. The next thing I know, he's sweating through his shirt, pacing wildly, and talking on the phone. Emily lost it when her mother claimed that they were having a professional disagreement. She locked herself in the bridal room, shouted and tossed her bouquet at him in front of the makeup artists. Extra champagne is being used to stall the visitor. Jared is attempting to defuse the situation, but you know how that works. Not because I was shocked, but rather because of the lyrical symmetry, I nearly dropped my coffee mug. I took a seat at my kitchen table, read the letter 3 times, and then just laughed quietly and completely, not out of retaliation, but out of relief. Emily's wedding was not ruined by me. I didn't ruin Brian's work. I just took myself out of the picture and let their dysfunction to take my place. As it happens, Brian failed to disclose certain significant information on his job application. such as his history of exploiting company resources for personal endeavors, such as producing wedding promotional content for Emily's expanding influencer program during business hours. Even worse, his social media presence has begun to cause internal concerns due to Jared's foolish posts. Erica's follow-up messages indicate that before extending his offer, HR had raised concerns about the matter and requested clarity right away. As they say, timing is crucial. However, the wedding still took place. It was kind of 2 hours late. At last, the ceremony started. Erica, who had access to gossip at the level of a maid of honor, said that Emily had calmed down sufficiently to walk down the aisle. Throughout her vows, she never smiled and her eyes were crimson. She needed constant reminders from the photographer to appear joyful. During the processional, Brian was clearly frightened and spoke to Jared in an agitated whisper. He even dropped the ring at one point. "I'm not even kidding!" The gathering then proceeded to Lorne. My parents were present, naturally sitting in the center and acting as if nothing was wrong. My mom had a tight Botox-like smile on her face. Apparently, my dad kept looking at the exits, as if he thought someone might show up at the party. Nobody did. However, I did upload a picture that night. Nothing noteworthy. It's just me in my new apartment, with a stack of books next to me, a cup of coffee in my hand, and the Asheville skyline in the distance. It was a straightforward caption. Sometimes peace appears like a one-bedroom in a sealed door. I tagged. No one said nothing else inside an hour. Melanie liked it, then unliked it, then liked it again. The week following the wedding, I got a parcel in the mail. No return address. Inside was a little envelope, the sort used for elegant invites. Inside that was a handwritten message. "I'm sorry, I got it now. No signature, but I recognize the penmanship." It was Emily's. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Over the next 3 weeks, the communication slowed. My mom tried once more, this time gentler. "I miss you. Things haven't been the same." But I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because the weight of those words no longer meant what she believed they did. Missing me only mattered if they ever actually saw me in the first place. Jared went silent after that. Maybe someone finally informed you that publicly trashing the person who used to pay your credit card wasn't the wisest option. Or maybe he finally understood I wasn't coming back. Melanie surprise contacted out 2 months later with a photo of a damaged light and a short statement. "Okay, I know why you barred us from the Prime account. Just tell me where you acquired this light." I adore it. I provided her a link. That was it. No further talk. Just a clean, respectful discussion between two grown-ups who have learned how to keep their distance. As for my parents, well, I heard from Erica that they were suffering with the business. Turns out, without the whole loan and with numerous payments already overdue, they had to downsize. My dad sold off 2 vehicles. My mom ceased her weekly salon sessions. The expansion plans were halted indefinitely, yet they survived. They always do. People like them, people who assume the world owes them merely for existing, don't fall in a single spectacular blast. They dissolve slowly, silently, until one day they look around and all the individuals who used to hold them up are just gone. And me, I'm still in Asheville. I picked up hiking, got into photography. There's a bookshop around the corner that conducts open mic evenings, and I've even read a few essays. They're tales about boundaries, about choosing yourself, about the quiet power of walking away. No one in the crowd knows they're about my family. No one has to. A few weeks back, a woman came me afterward and mentioned that one about the restaurant that hit. I've been that person at the table. I grinned and just responded, "Yep, me too." That's the problem. I didn't require retribution. I didn't have to create a scene, shout, or turn the tables. I only needed to step away from the table and let them handle the money.